Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 3, Psychological Health. I want to preface this by reminding you all that I am not a psychologist, and this is in no way meant to be an exhaustive study into psychological health. This is just kind of a preview to give you an overarching idea of what psychological health entails and give you some ideas of where, if you're interested, where to look into different parts of the subject in the future. If you've taken a psychology course or an AP psychology course, a lot of this might be stuff you really already know. So if you want to skip this, I don't want to say skip the lecture, but if you want to go to the assignments before doing this lecture and you do fine on them, there's no reason to listen to it. However, if you're worried you might miss something, it's a good thing to either make sure you're really reading the chapter in great detail or make sure you listen to this lecture. Okay. Let's talk. So when we were talking about the outcomes for this class, we talked about how we wanted to analyze all the different components of wellness. You'll notice that even though there is a emotional component to the major parts of wellness, and there's a spiritual one, there's no specific psychological component, and that's because psychological health is such a broad concept that it is going to encapsulate all parts of wellness. Okay, so having poor psychological health is going to affect everything else. Okay, so let me find where I am in my notes. Here we go. Okay. So we define psychological health as something that we can either define it negatively, so you don't have a sickness, or I could say I have psychological wellness because I am not ill. Okay, that's one way. Or we could define it positively, as in I have good mental health. Okay, either one of those ways are a way to describe psychological health. You notice those are very broad and they don't really give you the definition. So we're going to be looking at what that means. Again, psychological health contributes to every dimension of wellness. And your book says most people do not suffer from mental illnesses. This might actually be changing as more and more people come forward as being having depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia. But the point is, no matter what the numbers are, we all experience stress. Okay, so we talked about this in one of the last lectures. Stress is a major part of everyone's life, and how you react to stress, either consciously or subconsciously, is part of your psychological health. Okay, we all experience conflicts and emotions, and psychological health helps us be able to function when we face these challenges, either with or without a mental illness. Okay. So let's take a look at what some of these things mean. So there's something called the Maslow, the hierarchy of needs. So this psychologist in 1968 published what he called the hierarchy of needs, and he basically said, if you meet all of your physiological needs, this is the most important, then you can then go on to meet your safety needs. If you meet your safety needs, so what this means is, if you're physiologically healthy, so you have enough food, you have enough water, you are physically fit, etc., and are meeting your sexual needs, if you're a sexual individual, then you can go on to worry about your safety and security. But if you don't, let's look at that picture actually real quick. So this is what it usually looks like. It's a hierarchy because it builds on itself. Okay, so we first have to meet your physiological needs before you can go on and meet your safety and security needs. There's no, and sometimes there is some overlap. Okay, you can't protect other people if you're not getting enough food yourself. Okay, that's the idea there. Put your own mask on before you put someone else's mask on. Once you have all your physiological or many physiological needs met and your safety and security needs met, you go on to taking care of your love and belongingness needs. So do you feel loved, connected? Do you feel like you belong? Once you feel like this is met, you can go on and see. So this is basically how do you function in your community. And then once you start to function in your community, you can go on and see how do you view yourself as a person, and we're going to talk about self-esteem a lot, and how do you view yourself in a relationship. Once all of these things are met, Maslow described what he called self-actualization. We're going to talk about what that means. Okay, so self-actualization. Self-actualization is a state met by people who have fulfilled a good measurement of their human potential. What does that mean? So Maslow said, look, we can't just be people who go to work, go home, watch TV, go to bed. There has to be something else going on. And it's actually, we're finding in a lot of Alzheimer's studies that this is true. If you are just someone who goes to work, comes home, watches TV, goes to bed, you're more likely to develop Alzheimer's. So if you're not stimulating your brain in some way and you don't feel like you're fulfilling some life goal, there tends to be a correlation between that and dementia and Alzheimer's later in life. So, what does it mean to be self-actualized? So, self-actualization, according to Maslow, says you have to be, and this is something that everyone is working towards their entire life and can come and go. Okay, so if you're a self-actualized human being, you are realistic. You know the difference between what's real, between what you want and what you can get, okay, what the world can give you. So, I want to marry Chris. Which one is the one? Any of those Chris's that are all sexy in the celebrity news. But I know that that's not going to happen, okay? So that is a sense of realism. So there are people who do not have that part of self-actualization and have decided, oh no, I will marry Thor. It will happen. It's not going to happen. He's married, he has kids, he lives in Australia, okay? So realism is knowing the difference between what's real and what you can get from the world. Okay, and it also is where you accept evidence even if it contradicts your beliefs. So this can be really hard for people. You can get some kind of life-shattering piece of news that changes everything you believe in. So if you were, and especially if it's something different from how you were raised, okay? So if you were raised for so long to think of somebody as an enemy, and then you meet that person and suddenly you realize, oh wait, you're not actually dangerous like I thought, that can be something, if you are a self-actualized person, you could make that change. It might be hard, but it's worth it. And this is where a lot of racism comes from. If you're raised to believe a certain kind of person or a certain group of people is dangerous, and then you never meet that person, or if you never meet that person in a civil situation, you can't then... oftentimes you won't have that self-actualization moment of being more realistic about it, and that can be really hard. We won't go into any more than that. Another thing self-actualized people have is a sense of acceptance. So the idea is having a positive but realistic self-image or healthy self-esteem. So this is not everything about you is perfect, okay? This is, I have imperfections, but I'm okay with it. I am tolerant about these imperfections. It means you can tolerate, if you can tolerate imperfections in yourself, you can also tolerate them in other people. So people who get incredibly obsessed with going to the gym 3 or 4 times a day they're so obsessed with their own body image that they then are incredibly intolerant of imperfections in other people, okay? Things like that. So you can't be we won't say it that way. Okay, let's keep going. But positive self-concept and healthy self-esteem. These are 2 parts of acceptance that we'll talk about a lot. So self-concept is how do you think of yourself, and self-esteem is kind of part of that. We'll get into it later. Autonomy is part of self-actualization, so being able to act on your own regardless of your social environment. So this is not just you can live on your own, you can make your own waffles, whatever. This is, if you're in a social environment, can you make decisions that are your own and not just what other people are doing, okay? Sometimes you can't, we're all influenced by the people around us, we're humans, we're social, but can you, if your whole group of peers says, we're all going to go see this movie, and you're like, I don't want to see that movie, it is a measure of autonomy if you say, you know guys, you go do that, I'm going to go home and I'll see you later. Okay, that's hard for a lot of people because you want to be so involved in your group that you may do something that it's harmful to yourself. So this is the classic example of being peer pressure for drugs or alcohol. But a fully self-actualized person is working towards this idea that they're completely autonomous. This doesn't mean you only make decisions based on your own feelings. So if you're in a relationship or a partnership, and any kind of relationship, not just intimate, etc., you are always making compromises because we do live in a world with other people. Authenticity. So authenticity is not being afraid to be yourself, and people who are fully authentic tend to seem a little bit childlike because they respond with no pretense or self-consciousness. So they don't worry about what people are thinking about how they make a decision. And if you think about it, little kids do that too. They're not worried about if they run up a slide and start yelling like a dinosaur, people are going to be mad, that person's going to think I'm crazy. No, they're little kids. They're just doing what's fun for them, okay? So the same thing with people. If you're not afraid to wear that outfit, then do it. Like, then you're authentic. If you're authentic to yourself because you know you want to do a thing and you're not worried about how people feel about it, other people feel about it other than yourself, then that is part of your self-actualization process. keep on going. Capacity for intimacy is a very higher level human functionality. So if you can share feelings and thoughts with somebody else without fear of rejection, and this is not just physical intimacy, but emotional intimacy, etc., but also physical intimacy. If you can do this without fear of rejection and with empathy for the other person, then you're really on that full human self-actualization pathway. And if you're creative, this doesn't mean every single person should be able to pick up an instrument or paint a painting or whatever. This could be you're creative in your homework assignments, you're creative in your business ventures, etc. So you're not just waiting for somebody to tell you what to do, you're thinking of creative things yourself. Now, self-actualization is very, very hard and is an ultimate life goal, and it comes and it goes, and it is based on everything else going on in your life. So these are things that people work on their entire lives. So if you've been listening to me talk about this or reading it in the book and thinking, oh my god, I'm none of these things, that's good. That means you're human. That means that you are always changing how you feel about things, and the important thing is that we can change. So if we're never perfect, and even if you suddenly can check all of these boxes because all of a sudden you are realistic, you can accept yourself, you're autonomous, you're authentic, etc. That doesn't mean you're just going to stop and be like, I'm done, I don't have to work on myself ever again. That's a silly idea. We're always constantly working on ourselves psychologically. Okay? Alright, we talked about that. So let's talk about positive psychology. So not the absence of wellness, not the absence, that's bad. So negative psychology is the absence of illness. So that's not good enough. You can't just say, well, but I don't have any mental diseases, so I'm done. Well, you're not a fully well-rounded human being if you do that, okay? You're not psychologically healthy if you do that. So positive psychology is focused on defining goals and ways to achieve them, because no matter where you are in your life, you have goals. And this may not be, what's your 5-year plan? It may be, how am I going to get through this class? Or something like that. So again, self-actualization, or which we can do with this positive psychology, is a continuous goal. It's rarely achieved. But there's another psychologist who said that there are 3 equally valid dimensions to positive psychology, or just being human. So this is the goal of positive psychology, is to help you have a pleasant life. So can you maximize those positive emotions? So bad things happen all the time, but don't fear the future or resent the past. So find what makes you happy and minimize the things that cause pain. So if you have a friend who's incredibly toxic and is always making you feel bad about yourself, that's not going towards your pleasant life. That's affecting you negatively. That is something that's not helping your positive psychology. It is actually better for you to cut that person out of your life. And it can be a very painful process, especially if it's someone you've known since you were kids. But we're not the same people we were when we were kids. So it is totally relevant to cut toxic people out of your life, and it's actually important. Okay, keep going. Okay, so another dimension of positive psychology, or something in positive psychology that we're going for, is an engaged life. So this is where you're cultivating positive personality traits such as courage, leadership, kindness, integrity, and where you can use your own talents to go towards these things. So if okay, so this is the idea. If you find that you're really good at listening to your friends when they have a problem, that's a positive personality trait that you can cultivate. So that's kindness. If you find that you're really good at just basically whatever you're really good at that is helping your life, that's part of your engaged life. So it's not just, again, you're not just going home, watching TV, and going to bed. You are finding things that help you engage with other humans. Because part of this also involves emotional intelligence. So can you identify your own emotions and respond to others, and use this idea to help you reach your goals? Now, the important thing is this can be learned. If you're someone who has a very, very short temper, that's not the end of the world. You just have to be able to identify when you're about to lose your temper and then change whatever you're doing that's triggering that temper and become positive again. So this isn't all just, yay, happy, positive thoughts all the time. It's using whatever's happening in your life to develop more positive goals, okay? Because the ultimate goal is we want to have a meaningful life. There have been so many studies that show it doesn't matter how rich you are, if you don't feel like you have a fulfilling life, you tend to you get stressed and you get sick faster, okay? So it's one of those stressors that humans have that no other animal has. I can tell you right now, my cat does not care if he has a meaningful life. He doesn't know what that means, okay? He just is happy he gets his food, he gets his water, he gets to poop in the cat box, okay? And sometimes I give him some pets and he purrs. It's all happy. That's it. He only meets that very bottom rung of the hierarchy of needs because that's all he needs. He doesn't have that higher cognitive function that humans have, and because we have such intense cognitive function, we have to be able to activate it and use it in ways, or we literally lose it through things like Alzheimer's. Okay, meaningful life. Can you work with others towards a meaningful end? So these three things, these are not especially scientific, and sometimes they overlap a lot. They can be influenced by religion. Some people say different religions emphasize different parts. Some people call these things philosophies. And there have been a lot of critics that say, and a lot of times when you just emphasize positive psychology, you're ignoring harsh realities. So, that kind of thing is stuff people talk about in existential psychology versus positive psychology. We're not going to get into that. Let's move on instead to what psychological health is not. Okay, so psychological health is not the same as normality. So there is no one normal psychological state. So we have a normal physiological temperature. Our body likes to be 98.4 or 8 or whatever it is degrees. You may run a little bit hotter, you may run a little bit colder, but if you go 1 or 2 degrees above your normal, you get a fever and it's really bad for you. If you go a couple of degrees below your normal, you hyperventilate, and that's really, not hyperventilate, you go into hypothermia, and that's really bad for you. But that doesn't happen in psychological health. We have ups, we have downs, we have good days, we have bad days. There's no normal. And what is normal to one person, or what might be a good thing to one person, or a bad state to one person, can be completely different to another person, okay? So this is incredibly individualized because we are individuals, okay? It's the idea of never having to seek psychological health is not a sign of health. Okay, there are some people who boast, well, I've never been to therapy. I've never had to talk to anyone about my feelings. I don't even have feelings. That's not great. Okay, so what's really happening in those cases is a lot of times people are suffering in silence. And what this does is build up your stress response in a way that is very dangerous. And it prevents you from getting any kind of help that you need. So a good analogy is if you say, well, I've never had a cavity, so I'm never going to the dentist. Well, that doesn't make sense. You could develop a cavity and then just be like, well, I've never needed to go to the dentist before. Why should I do it now? Well, everything's changing all the time. Of course, you should go to the dentist, get checked up, etc. So you don't have to go and get professional psychological help to still seek someone out to help you with your own psychological health, okay? So you can talk to friends about what you're going through. You can make sure you are paying attention to your emotions, etc., etc. Let's keep going, okay? People cannot be mentally ill or mentally healthy based solely on their symptoms. We can, so we change let me see, what do I want to say? Again, there is no normal, a lot of times when you see people who, appear really happy, or like comedians, for example, who are always telling jokes and happy, they are often some of the most depressed people. They just, especially with people who have a really positive outward-facing persona, maybe they could be really, really depressed and they just don't want anyone to ever know, or they don't want to make anyone else sad because they know how hard it is to go through that. So you can't just look at someone and say, oh, that person is mentally ill. Okay, you also can't say things like, oh, I'm so OCD because I only write with a purple pen. Now, that's not the same as being OCD. That is a preference, okay? And so we'll talk a bit about that. You can't, so kind of on this same idea, you can't judge psychological health just on outward appearance, and this is what a lot of people really don't like about this. So it's, for a long time, everyone hated this, like people, especially in the US, I guess probably everywhere, said, well, if I don't have a broken leg, why am I going to go to the doctor and talk about what's wrong with me? that doesn't make sense. And so people for a long time would get ulcers because they were working too hard and too stressed out about it, and they refused to seek any kind of psychological help. This was before psychological help was even a normality. And so when doctors said, oh, you have an ulcer because you're so stressed out that you are in a stress response all the time because you're worried about work too much, and it's making your physiology change, and now you have stomach pain. People got super pissed. Like, why? My emotions shouldn't affect my health? That's stupid. But now we know actually our psychological health is a major health component, and it can affect our physiological health. Okay? Yeah, let's keep going. Okay. All right, so let's talk about how to meet life's challenges with a positive self-concept. So how can you meet the stressors of your life, deal with the stressors of your life in a way that positively influences our psychological development and our personalities, okay? So okay, so let's talk about it this way. So when you're a kid, you're not only growing into a new body, you're growing into new parts of your brain, okay? So parts of your brain are not fully developed when you're born, obviously. You don't actually, well, we'll talk about it in a second. We'll get to it in a second, yeah, okay. What do I want to say? So, as we're growing up, we start developing coping mechanisms for meeting stressors in life. A lot of this is directly things we see from what our parents are doing or what we get from TV or whatever media source that we are using, okay? We can look at so we're constantly always changing our psychology, but there's 3 big stages that we go through, 3 big differences. And this guy, Erik Erikson, talked about how personality and identity develop through several big stages of life. The first is identifying or developing your adult identity, so that difference between being a kid and being an adult. And this is incredibly hard. So teenagers go through a huge crisis, often go through a big crisis, because they just don't know who they are. To the point that I read a case study where this girl had the same name as somebody who had been murdered in her neighborhood. Okay, and it was in the news so much, and someone teased her about it so much when she was 12 that she became so confused about who she was, she started to have some sort of delusion, in fact, where she thought she was the murdered girl, and she started having a lot of issues dealing with reality because she was so confused about, am I that person? I'm not the kid I was. So that's an extreme example of an identity crisis, where you just literally don't know who you are. Usually it's just, I'm not a kid anymore, but I'm not an adult yet, and my parents still treat me like a kid, my teachers treat me like a kid, but I want to have responsibilities, and who am I going to be as an adult, and that's what an identity crisis tends to come out as. So when a teenager has a temper tantrum of some sort, sometimes it's the brain testing out certain emotions, sometimes it's the result of just a lot of confusing hormones happening all at the same time as the brain is restructuring itself in puberty. And a lot of it mostly just needs to be treated with compassion and information to tell the kid what's going on. Okay, so as kids are developing their adult identity, it's helping them understand their uniqueness and how they view themselves realistically and understand their strengths and weaknesses. And it lets us go into that next phase where we are starting to develop intimacy while maintaining a strong sense of self without outside opinions. Now, this is really hard to do during the teenage years because there's so much drive to have sex. So there's a biological drive, that lusty drive to get it on, because evolution has not caught up to the fact that we shouldn't actually have babies at 12, but our bodies don't know any better, and they really want to make that happen, and so we have periods, we start to experience different parts of the sex drive, etc. But it's not until you know who you are that you can really start developing really intense intimacy, where it's not just, one night stands and never call again, or, being confused about, do they like me, do they not like me, it's clear communication and being able to know who you are as a person in these in these situations. And again, this is always changing and developing, and there's no end point. So you can talk to older individuals and they tell you that maybe they start struggling with intimacy again as they start going into their elder years. Maybe you see what is called a midlife crisis is another identity crisis where someone says, well, I've been this person for so long, am I really still that person? Am I really truly self-actualized? Maybe I don't want to identify as this older person, and so that's when they try to reinvigorate themselves with, the comments. But stereotype is a fancy car and a young model girlfriend or boyfriend. So this is something that to be aware of, that identity crises can happen all through life. And there's one final stage, which is developing your values and purpose, and that again is when you could be developing a midlife crisis. You're not sure, so you've got hit all those main points about job, finish college, got a family, but now what? So now what do I do? Oh, I don't have a value, I don't have a purpose, etc. So that could be a point of crisis. So there's a quote, life is more interesting for those who are constantly exploring and evolving. So basically, and this again leads to things like you ward off stuff like dementia and Alzheimer's, the more you activate your brain, okay? If you are constantly exploring who you are as a person and how to better yourself, either psychologically or health-wise in other ways, you are going to be less controlled by your past selves. So identity is a lifelong process, and constantly exploring it is a way to stay healthy. Okay, so let's talk about that. Self-esteem. Self-esteem is how we view ourselves. So how do you achieve healthy self-esteem? So the idea is you want to regard yourself as a good, competent person who is worthy of love, and this is critical for wellness. So this seems a little touchy-feely, but because of how we are as humans, we're social individuals. We need to feel like we are worthy individuals and we're worthy of love. That doesn't mean you have to be in a relationship, but you have to know, you have to have the feeling that people around you think you're important, okay? And love you, okay? So it takes a while to develop this positive self-concept for a lot of people, and again, this is something that's constantly being reassessed. So hopefully the ideal situation is a kid is raised in a loving environment, and we've talked about in the last talk about stress that if a kid is raised in a loving environment, they tend to grow up with less stressor, they're more resilient to stressors, and then they become loving parents themselves, okay? A lot of times when you are, no matter how you're raised, either in a good or a bad environment, you integrate a lot of the things that you see your parents do or whoever's raising you do. This could be good, this could be bad. So this is when people say, oh, I've become my mother. Ugh. Okay, and this is, someone told me today that their thing is whenever they leave the house, they always take a coat. Every day, no matter what. They always take a coat or a sweater. Well, I live in Los Angeles now. Taking a coat outside in May is ridiculous. Why? Why would you do that? And so I asked her, well, do you tell your kids to always take a coat? And she said, I try so hard not to, because she's just integrated into her own self-concept of who she is that she can't not do it. Okay? Another aspect of this positive self-concept is stability. Do you switch between states? Like, are you constantly out clubbing every night, or do you're really social, and then suddenly you're really antisocial? Now, we go through different moods. That's just being human. One day we want to do this, one day we want to do that. One day we can afford to do this, one day we can afford to do that. But the idea of stability is, can we maintain emotional states or a positive self-concept? So if around one group of people you are you feel great about yourself, you like who you are as an individual, and then around another group of people you feel like a horrible, worthless individual, well, you haven't established a healthy self-concept yet, okay? And it could be you just need to get away from those people who make you feel bad, okay? Excuse me, it could be something as simple as that, or it could be more complicated. So, okay, let's keep going. So meeting your challenges to self-esteem is something very important, okay? So how are you going to deal with the stressors that stress you psychologically, okay? So one thing is to, so some of these things can be the end of relationships, the end of jobs, the end of some major part of your life, or it could be the loss of a loved one through death. It could be basically major emotional stressors. Remember that our brain views these same stressors with the exact same intensity as it does if you were about to be eaten by a mountain lion, okay? It doesn't matter that it's an emotional stressor versus a physiological stressor. It's still going to affect you the same way. So the outcome has to, if you're going to be healthy, has to meet this challenge in a way where you maintain your self-esteem or you actually improve your self-esteem. Okay, so you're going to meet things that are going to challenge your self-concept, okay, and like these emotional stressors, and the end result should be that you acknowledge something has gone wrong, try again, and don't blame yourself or other people for what happened, okay? So a relationship ended. It's very distressing. We love to pair bond as human beings. We like to be pair bonded. But that doesn't mean you are a horrible individual. That doesn't mean you will never be in another relationship. You should acknowledge something went wrong, maybe look to ways to avoid, whatever that was in the future, or just realize that two people don't always work, and that happens, and then you move on with your life, okay? So one way to do that is to notice your patterns of thinking, okay? So it's really easy if something bad happens in your life to become demoralized, and this is where your stressor reinforces a negative self-esteem or a negative self-concept. So you already feel kind of bad about yourself, and then a relationship ends, and you say, well, obviously I'm a bad person, that's why my relationship ended, and now I'm an even worse person. So you get into kind of this spiral of negative thinking. So to notice your pattern of thinking is to say, I notice I'm spiraling. I need to find a way to distract myself. Or maybe this is a place where journaling is really good. So you can say, something bad happened today. And then you can say, every time I'm spiraling these thoughts, it's right before dinner. So maybe I'm not angry, I'm hungry, so I'm hangry, okay? And so it could be you need to change your behavior patterns, and then that'll change how you think about yourself. Okay? All right. What's next? So this is important to notice if you have what are called cognitive distortions, or if you're catastrophizing, okay? So catastrophizing is where you say something like, I failed a test, I'm never going to be good at anything. So that's taking one event and making it, blowing it way out of proportion, okay? So that is not good for your self-esteem, and it's not realistic. So it's good to catch these things and develop realistic self-talk, okay? So avoid focusing on the negative aspects of things and develop realistic self-talk. Well, maybe I failed this test because I didn't study well enough, or maybe I didn't understand how this was going to be worded, or et cetera, okay? So that's realistic self-talk. So realistic self-talk is not just, everything will be better next time, even though that's a good way to think as well. This realistic self-talk is where you make thoughts logical and accurate, not just positive, and you don't jump to conclusions, okay? So again, don't catastrophize. Just because one thing went wrong doesn't mean everything's always going to go wrong. All right. Let's talk about how we deal with psychological defense mechanisms, okay? So our brains, again, where we evolved, where we were constantly facing environmental dangers, not psychological dangers, and so our brains have ways to deal with these stressors psychologically, which are not always healthy, okay? So defense mechanisms allow people to rearrange their thoughts and feelings to resolve conflicts, okay? So obviously managing our feelings is a lifelong process, and sometimes you may notice at one point in life that you always do a certain thing that's unhealthy, or you may notice someone else, like, why is that person always so positive and when something bad happens, or they always do something good when something bad happens. Maybe they have a healthy way to deal with psychological stressors. So when uncomfortable things happen, we develop these defense mechanisms. So they can be healthy and adaptive. So humor and altruism. So altruism is when you help other people. So when during 9/11, so I was in college during 9/11, and the thing that stood out to me the most was that everybody, there were so many people who immediately lined up to donate blood that they had lines around the block. Okay, so many people in the face of this horrible psychological stressor of terrorism were like, well, what can I do to help? Okay, so that's altruism. We see this in, there were several mass shootings last week, because that's the unfortunate normality of American living now. And so a lot of times people say when that happens, they don't say a maladaptive strategy is to blame a certain group, to blame a certain policy, etc. You can blame, but that's not going to help anything. One thing you can do instead is to say, well, what can I do to help? So either this doesn't happen again, or I can help the victims who it actually happened to. Humor also helps, so talking about smaller level things than terrorism. If something bad happens, a stressful thing happens, let's say, so something that happens to me a lot, I fall down in public a lot because I just am bad at balancing. I very often people will be horrified. Oh my God, that professor fell down. But I think it's hilarious because I've taught myself to treat it as hilarious because it happens a lot. And so falling down, when I fall down, I'll laugh about it and make a joke. Like, oh, gravity is really heavy today. It's not a good joke, but it's a joke. Because again, it's just, I'm not going to, if you dwell on what stresses you out psychologically, you just get more stressed out. And we don't want that, okay? A lot of defense mechanisms are unhealthy, though, and can obscure your solutions, and they can actually make you more stressed out in the long run. So if you, for example, if you're angry at one situation and let's say something happened at work and it made you really mad and you can't do anything about it. Your boss yelled at you for seemingly no reason. You can't do anything about it. So you're stressed out and you go home and you take it out on people at home. Well, that might make you feel better in that moment because you've suddenly, that frustration you've been holding in, you take out on somewhere else. Well, that's awesome, except now that person is stressed out and you've hurt somebody. So that is a maladaptive strategy, okay? So, yeah. So you see that's a lot in abuse situations where they take, so this is actually called projection, where you can't react to something yourself and so you project it onto somebody else. So, we're not going to go into all of these, but I will put some things on your radar. So, projection, reacting to unacceptable impulses by denying and attributing them to others. Okay, so what was I saying? I was saying shifting your feelings. Anyway, doesn't matter. Repression is something you see a lot in people. So bad thing happens, I'm just never going to think about it again. Well, this can build up your stress response over time, and that can lead to, if you have too long of a stress response, you start to build up a lot of bad stress physiology, and that can lead to things like heart attacks and strokes. Okay, let's just keep going. This is a good thing to look over because it's interesting to see, do I have any of these things? Like, do you deny that, no, I'm not a bad singer. Everyone else is just stupid. Well, even maybe you are denying, maybe you are a bad singer, whatever it is. Do you detach or dissociate yourself from experiences so you don't have to feel stressed out? Do you distract yourself by substituting something with something that's easier? Okay, etc. So let's talk instead about some meeting challenges positively, because we can definitely look at all the negative things, but that doesn't. One thing that might come out of this lecture, by the way, is you may come out of it thinking, oh my God, I have all of these things. So rather than dwelling on examples of displacement, where you might think, displacement was the one where someone is mean to you, so you're mean to somebody else. Don't do that. Not good for you. So rather than dwelling on the negatives and then putting that in your head so much, let's dwell on the positives, okay? So one way to meet things in a healthy way or react to psychological stressors in a healthy way is to be optimistic. So this is where you emphasize hopeful and favorable outcomes in a way that is realistic. So it's not, well, every test is going to go great. Well, okay, not if you didn't study, okay? So be realistic and positive. Maintain honest communication. You cannot expect people to know everything about you and how you feel about things if you don't tell them, okay? So they could be completely oblivious to your needs if you don't say something. So this is a place where a lot of people get assertiveness training, especially really shy, introverted people. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to make someone upset. But by letting somebody else call all the shots and by never communicating honestly, you're only hurting yourself, okay? So assertiveness training can teach you how to express your feelings in a positive way. So, and a lot of times people avoid doing this because they're worried that they're going to be seen as, they're going to be rejected. Like, as humans, we're always worried about being rejected. And so that's someplace where, well, you're less likely to be rejected than you think you are. Okay. Dealing with loneliness is something we all need to worry about. So we're social animals, like I've been saying. Even introverts need company sometime. So how you deal with loneliness is very important. This is not, well, I am going to lock myself in my room for 3 months and study, and then go out and maybe I can hire someone to have sex with. That is not dealing with loneliness. That is a dangerous behavior. That is not good for you. This is how do you reach out and make contacts with people who you can then talk to when you need to. This could be something you do online. This is not trolling on like a YouTube channel. This is emailing people who are far away, FaceTiming with somebody you haven't seen in a while, etc. Maybe you have to be locked in your room to study for a month or something, but you should still reach out and deal with that loneliness, because people who are lonely tend to live much shorter lives because they just build up so much stress that they're not dealing with. How do you deal with anger in a positive way? We all get angry, and it's how you deal with it that is important. So on one extreme, people have a lot of trouble expressing any anger because, again, they don't want to upset anybody. So something will make them really, really mad, and they just say nothing, okay? On the other extreme, we get people who express their anger incredibly explosively and inappropriately. So when I was growing up, whenever anything happened in a store that my dad, or in a restaurant that my dad didn't like, he would scream and cuss and get really red in the face, and then he would feel better because he let it all out, but everyone around him would feel horrible. So the waitress would feel bad for messing up his order, I would feel bad for having a scary, scary dad, and my mom would be mortified and embarrassed because he acted so crazily. So just because you end up feeling better does not mean it's a healthy way to take care of something. Another thing to think about is if you express anger explosively and inappropriately, this could be a sign of a mental disorder or a trauma. Okay, so do keep that in mind. We have seen, and we're not exactly sure why, but people who express their anger more explosively tend to develop a lot more stress, physiological stress responses, and this can lead to heart attacks a lot more frequently. So remember that, so how do you deal with anger? So remember that anger is contagious. So we have what are called mirror neurons. So again, thinking back to when we were evolving as a social species, to maintain social dynamics, we look to each other to see how another person is reacting to something. And if one person is really scared, it tends to make other people scared, unless they're in charge of whatever's being scary. So same thing with anger. If one person is angry, it's very easy for that anger to spread, and then if that escalates, it can lead to violence, okay? So calmness and empathy are also contagious. So if someone is being really angry, one way you can deal with it is, if it's yourself or someone else, is to try and incite calmness. So if someone is being angry at you, try and be calm to them, not in a patronizing way, but just ask, well, what's making you so angry? How can we fix this, okay? If it's yourself who's so angry, think about how you can reframe it. Stop and think. Maybe stop and count, because maybe you're, as my friend who plays soccer says, you're seeing the red mist. You're so angry that you're just seeing red. Well, take a second and just either distract yourself by trying to look at something else or talk to someone else, or count it down, and so that's major stress just kind of dissipates a little bit, okay? So this idea, you don't want to always avoid sensitive topics. You just want to know how to deal with them. For example, I tend to avoid talking about politics with people who I know are not going to debate in like a logical way, and so I avoid talking to it with them, but I'll find people I know will react to them with me in ways that are more positive. Okay, I think I'm going to, let's end today's lecture here, and starting tomorrow we'll talk about psychological disorders, and we'll probably shift the syllabus a little bit so that one of our lectures this week actually gets moved to next week, and please let me know if you have any questions. Bye.